Of all that is written, I love only what a person hath written in his blood. Write with blood, and thou wilt find blood is spirit. It is no easy task to understand the unfamiliar blood. I hate the reading idler. He who knoweth the reader does nothing more for the reader. Another century of readers, and the spirit itself will stink. A quote from Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher and a personal favorite of mine. But what does this 100-plus year-long dead philosopher have to do with the time-rewinding cowboy from Part 7 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure? Well, more than you might think, as Ringo Roadagain's True Man's World not only heavily impacts the rest of the story of Part 7, but is entirely populated by Übermenschen. Ringo Roadagain is a minor antagonist in the story of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 7 Steel Ball Run. Being one of the fans' most standout encounters along the whole of the Steel Ball Run race, he goes on to impact the rest of the part after he implants his ideologies into one of the deuteragonists of the story, this being Gyro Zeppeli. As in their final encounter, Ringo forces Gyro down the path of what he calls the True Man's World, which in itself is an ideology that Ringo developed over his years of being alive and slinging guns, strictly living by its morals right up until his end, even developing a stand ability called Mandom that allowed him to indulge in his views to their fullest. But what exactly does the True Man's World mean, and how did Ringo develop it? Well, to understand that, first we need to understand its origins. It all began long before the Steel Ball Run race was even a twinkle in Steven Steele's eyes, when Ringo was just a child. As a kid, Ringo was born with an unidentifiable disease, which gave him extremely sensitive skin, to the point that the lightest cut could cause him serious bleeding. A notable moment of this occurred when he would scrape his elbow on his bed, which would result in bleeding so bad that he required bandages, or even the small cuts that formed in his mouth, making it difficult for him to breathe due to the excessive bleeding. And due to these injuries, his mother would coddle him and keep him bedridden for his own safety, which, while stationary, would have been a perfectly fine life to live if not for his father's actions during the Civil War, where he fled the battlefield, was later hunted down, and then died of disease while in captivity. This brought only more hardship on his family, as they were branded as traitors to America as well. Though, even under these conditions, his family got through it day by day, moving from town to town until one night, when Ringo was just 10 years old, a soldier broke into their home and silently murdered everyone there with a knife, besides Ringo. He did so, likely because he didn't value them, but also because he found Ringo's meek demeanor attractive, and he attempted to force himself onto the boy, which gave Ringo the opportunity to grab the revolver at the man's side, draw it, and hold the invader up. Though, in that moment of life or death stakes, Ringo was overwhelmed with anxiety. The coddled life that he had lived up to this point left him unprepared to defend himself without hesitation, and his nose began to gush with blood, forcing him to cough and drop the revolver. And in that moment of weakness, the invader attacked, forcing Ringo to in turn quickly re-grab, ready, and fire the revolver, or he would most certainly die. And miraculously, Ringo succeeded. He put down his attacker, and beyond feeling his illness fade from a rush of adrenaline, Ringo saw something, a bright light that opened up like a path. This was Ringo entering the True Man's World for the first time. From this moment on, Ringo felt like a whole different person. In a duel for his life, he was able to eliminate all uncertainties with his life, and realistically what Ringo likely experienced here was what expert Kenneth Ring describes as a near-death experience. As noted, Ringo experienced Ring's 4 stages, especially focusing on the inner peace and seeing the light. His personality radically shifted in a similar manner to those that Professor Ring has reported to find in his studies, from a greater appreciation of life and a higher self-esteem, as noted with Ringo's peace with the world and faith in his abilities, to a greater compassion for others and less concern for acquiring material wealth. Ringo himself is a rather polite individual, not only offering advice to those that he is going to challenge, but also introducing himself and his abilities, along with respectfully bowing to those that he has killed and burying them. He also lives a very minimalistic life, staying in an isolated cabin 400 plus miles away from the nearest city, with nothing more than a wood stove and a gun by his side, as he is not one for the materials of the world, but instead focuses on his own self-improvement. Though the most important aspect of the near-death experience survivor that Ringo represents is his heightened sense of self-understanding and desire to be more informed. Ringo contextualizes these feelings into an ideology that he calls the True Man's World, which essentially discusses the ideas of self-betterment through the removal of oneself from society's morals as a whole and focuses on improving your own whole. This is usually done by pushing yourself to your natural limits and then finding that pull that will drag yourself beyond them so that you can evolve as a person. Ringo himself himself achieves this through the action of a fair one-on-one duel to the death with those that he encounters. The point of these duels are because Ringo believes that society has moved away from the notion of killing for survival and ultimately has weakened man's ambition as a whole, coddling them in the same way he was as a child, resulting in them growing up without the hunger to improve. This is why, of all the people who arrive on the orchard, Ringo only sees value in Johnny, as Johnny's injury and trauma has given him the hunger to kill to survive, where Gyro and Hot Pants do not have that same desire, even though both of them carry their own unique trauma. Gyro is even described directly as a conformist, or someone that Ringo sees as conforming to societal standards, and just prior to this arc, Johnny was even criticizing Gyro for his lack of hunger in his actions. No matter how difficult his life had been up to that point, he spent it all following the orders of his father. Gyro wasn't his own person, and Ringo could tell that he could only kill in self-defense, really. If you notice, when Gyro does get aggressive and uses steel balls to take a life, he usually does so when he's antagonized the person to attack him. Gyro was merely a reader, when Ringo and Johnny are writers, men who would pen their own stories in blood. They are Übermenschen. Ringo's ideas of a true man's world are very similar to the concept of Friedrich Nietzsche's Übermensch, or Overman. Essentially, a man who has rejected and overcome societal values such as morals, ethics, and religion, and forged his own in the face of nihilism, and wills themselves to achieve their own ambitions and reach their true potential on their own. They are essentially the next step in evolution for man and have become icons in their own right. With the quote from Thus Spoke Zarathustra that I opened the video with being an example of this, describing the Übermensch as a man who writes their own story in blood or the essence of life, and thus those who read these stories and idle in life have done nothing for the man who has written it. They are conformists, who see the greats of the past and follow their actions without trying to create their own. Gyro is one of these ideal readers that Nietzsche hated so much. His actions up to this point were based on him putting his father's words on a pedestal, which in turn deprived him of the hunger that Johnny mentioned earlier. As even when Gyro is rebelling from his old life and has skills to surpass Johnny, he wasn't superior to Johnny in his motivation, as the stakes for the race weren't entirely personal for Gyro, and they were forged from a moral obligation he felt needed to be fulfilled, as in comparison to Johnny, who if he never participated would continue to wallow in his misery. Johnny is actively taking a role in this race, where Gyro is just participating in it. So comparatively, no matter how much Gyro struggles, his actions weren't his own to begin with, but are more so societal actions that he is fulfilling. He exists in a world of self-defense, where Johnny himself is only motivated by what benefits him in the now. He evolved past societal morals and created his own. He has become the Übermensch. Though, I could do an entire video on Johnny on his own, though interestingly enough, another aspect of Nietzsche's writing I found in Ringo's character is the eternal return. The idea that everything we've experienced in our lives will reoccur endlessly. And this comes in the form of Ringo's stand, Mandem, which allows him to essentially relive moments of time to ensure that he gets the desired result, continuing to evolve as a person because of this, and becoming more natural with his values. This is why when he rewinds time, Ringo's opponents keep all of their memories from the exchange, so that both of them can make the most optimal action, thus whoever wins the encounter will be changed for the better. And this is why the fairness of the duels is such an important aspect to Ringo, as he gains nothing if people aren't fighting at their fullest. And I can make the assumption that this relation to Nietzsche's writing is in part intentional on Araki, as Araki has shown signs of Nietzsche in his prior work, with things such as Made in Heaven being almost a direct example of the eternal return in the physical form, but also the fact that Araki's spin-off series, following his mangaka counterpart Rohan Kishibe, called Thus Spoke Rohan Kishibe, seems to be a direct reference to Nietzsche's own Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Also, the wording used by Ringo throughout the entirety of the True Man's World arc fits very well with the Thus Spoke Zarathustra's own wordings for what makes an Übermenschen. And on top of that, that theme fits well with the song which Ringo's Mandem gets its name from, as while the song, Lovers of the World, was designed for a commercial on men's cologne, the lyrics themselves discuss achieving an inner peace of sorts, considering the world of mandom to be one where a person not only feels fulfilled, but specifically loves themselves as well. Along with this, there's a certain respect for nature and the natural world, which is connected to Gyro and and Ringo's own battle, and makes their final duel at the end of the arc feel all that stronger, especially when Ringo welcomes Gyro into the true man's world, when he forces Gyro to deal his killing blow, thanking Gyro all the while as he was able to pass on his ideals to him. And in that action, Ringo has forced Gyro from being a reader into becoming a writer. And from this point on, Gyro would change as a person, working to honor Ringo's ideology of the true man's world, and ascending to the Übermensch status for himself, following the golden path from his attempts to overcome Diego both in racing talent and leave his spirits crushed, but also in him using the golden ratio more and more in his fights, which helped him return the status quo and made him again Johnny's teacher. Gyro was becoming more of his own person. He was a writer, shaping his own path and molding his image out of his father's shadow. And he would remain like this up until his final moments, where he awakened to a new ability in a life or death duel against President Funny Valentine, who was basked in a golden light. Gyro saw the true man's path, and was able to awaken the ability, Ballbreaker. The energy of the spin manifested and proof of Gyro's placement in the true man's world. He had done something that no other Zeppeli had, and he used this power to overcome the wall that was Funny Valentine's love train, the same way Ringo used his duel that night to overcome his illness as a child. Though, much like Ringo, when he finally gets what he wants, it costs him his life, as Gyro knowingly clashed blows with Valentine for a second time, knowing that his steel ball was incomplete. But he did so to impart a lesson onto Johnny, the same way Ringo forced Gyro's hand back in the cabin. In his final moments, he was able to write a message in his own blood, the instructions needed to elevate a man over life's hardships, and in turn, overcome Ringo's path of light as a whole, which is instrumental in Johnny's evolution to a true Übermensch. And with that all said and done, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to support me and my channel for the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/MediNotTheBadGuy. Every little bit helps keep this channel flowing as consistently as it does. And if you want to see a shortcut down the path of the true man's world, well, you can do so by buying a copy of Shimonetta, A Boring World Where the Concept of Dirty Jokes Doesn't Exist at buyshimonetta.com.